Okay, welcome everybody to the first in a series of webinars and live video streamed events brought to you by IPM. Today in our studios we have Ashley Gaare, Senior Business Development Representative with SoftwareONE, and Jason Cochran, Technology Evangelist with SoftwareONE, as well as Shannon Hazing, Marketing Director with IPM. Before we get moving and pass this off to the actual presentation, I want to give you a couple of notes of logistics. On the live site that you're viewing the presentation, you'll notice two things. One, on the left, a chat module. The chat module is for you to pose questions to the presenters and also chat amongst yourself if you're so inclined. What we'll do is address those questions that get posted at the end of the webinar. And then off to your right, you'll notice a scheduling feature. Please feel free to use this to schedule a time to follow up with IPM and or SoftwareONE to discuss Microsoft licensing in a virtual desktop environment. With that, I'm going to go ahead and hand it off to Shannon to introduce IPM's role and then on to SoftwareONE.
Thank you, and thank you for joining the first of a series of 6 virtual events, all part of the Consider It Done initiative. IPM Consider It Done was designed to provide you with the opportunity to learn key considerations for your current and future IT projects, and to also introduce IPM as a proven go-to firm for project execution. From Windows 7 migration and VDI to IT efficiency and cloud computing, IPM has worked with the presenting organizations to develop best practices that enable end-to-end project success. So to kick off the series, please welcome Ashley Gaare from SoftwareONE, discussing desktop virtualization and how to best license the solution.
Thanks, Shannon. So just a brief introduction, SoftwareONE is a international licensing solutions provider. We're actually the only Microsoft large account reseller that focuses exclusively on licensing. So we've partnered here with IPM to assist them on licensing solutions, and myself and my colleague Jason Cochran are going to go through desktop virtualization, what it is, the benefits, the components for a virtual desktop infrastructure, the licensing surrounding those solutions, and then we're going to go through a few customer scenarios that hopefully many of you guys can relate to. And then at the end, like they said, we'll take some questions. So with that said, I'm going to ask Jason here, what exactly would you consider desktop virtualization to be? I know Microsoft has a lot of solutions around it. Can you just give us a little bit of background and essentially what are the 3 components around it?
Sure, and thanks, Ashley. When you're considering desktop virtualization, unlike server virtualization, there are more options to consider than just the virtual machines that are running on a hypervisor. For example, with desktop virtualization, folder redirection and roaming profiles are also considerations. These are not new technologies. These are things that have been around for a while. You've always had the ability to redirect the folders to the data center instead of storing information locally. Application virtualization is another key area that you want to focus on, whether you're doing encapsulation with AppV or if you're using terminal services or remote desktop services, remote apps, and then also the operating system itself. Where is your virtual desktop infrastructure? Where do those VMs reside? And which applications are good candidates for remote desktop services versus running on a VM?
Thanks, Jason. So, being on the other end of things, I kind of would like you to go into what does that really mean for me? Exactly what are the benefits for my data center? What am I going to see as a result if I am considering a desktop virtualization environment?
Sure, Ashley. Unlike server virtualization, with desktop virtualization, you're going to see a different set of benefits. With server virtualization or consolidation, you really see an improved cost savings. You see a smaller footprint, lower power consumption, and a consolidation of the hardware. With desktop virtualization, however, those benefits are going to be very different. First of all, you get the ability to be much more agile. As you're taking those desktop images and moving them from the user's desktops and their laptops and bringing them into the data center, you have a lot more control. Your IT staff can provision new desktops much more quickly, and they can also deploy applications more rapidly. Now, Microsoft solutions are built with integrated management in mind so that you have one management solution for both your physical and your virtual environment. The security is applied both the same ways, and also you get access anywhere for your users. So let's take a look at some of the components. First of all, there's the user state virtualization. And what we mean by that is being able to take the user's profile and kind of separate that from the underlying operating system, whether that operating system is running on a physical device or if it's in a virtual machine. The application delivery is also something that you need to consider, whether you're running the applications directly on the operating system, virtualized on the operating system, or remotely via remote desktop services. The desktop delivery mechanisms are also very important. How do you get those images out? How do you maintain the images with a consistent baseline? And then the virtualization platform, of course, is one other piece that's very important. Why don't we take a look at some of the Microsoft products that align with those stacks? First of all, of course, with the user profiles and data, you have Windows 7. Windows 7 is capable of supporting the roaming profiles and the folder redirection. For the application delivery, you have AppV, or Application Virtualization, which is part of the Microsoft Desktop Optimization Pack. And then you also have remote desktop services, remote app, and then also running an entire desktop on the session itself. For the virtualization platform, you have Hyper-V, and then on the management side, you have all of the tools that are a part of System Center suite of products, Virtual Machine Manager to manage the actual virtual images themselves, Configuration Manager to manage the desktops. Again, it doesn't matter if they are physical or virtual. And then Operations Manager to automate the process of responding to events that pop up.
And Jason, from what I hear, Microsoft's next release of System Center is coming out next couple months, right?
That's true, actually. The System Center 2012 wave of products should be hitting the streets sometime early next year.
Yep, and what I heard is it's actually going to be able to manage third-party applications as well outside of Microsoft, so that's big news.
Third-party applications, other hypervisor platforms, and as well as adding some capabilities for cloud management.
Yep.
So now that we've taken a look at some of the technologies that comprise your VDI environment, why don't we switch gears just a little bit and start talking about the licensing. Ashley, can you help us out here?
Oh, sure. So I know everyone is probably biting at the bit to try to hear more about licensing solutions. Essentially, Microsoft has hopefully made it a little bit less complicated than it used to be. For a virtual desktop infrastructure, there's really two different ways to license your environment. One is going to be, both are per device or per desktop, whether it's a laptop, desktop, mobile phone. There's going to be, the first avenue is going to be PCs under software assurance. So they've changed, they've gotten rid of the old VECD terms, and they've now moved the roaming rights and the virtual desktop infrastructure rights included in software assurance. The second aspect is going to be for those thin clients. You cannot upgrade from a thin client device, therefore they're not eligible to buy software assurance with Windows 7 license. So in this case, you're going to be looking at what's called Virtual Desktop Access. This is a subscription-based license. It's all a per device, and it allows you to fluctuate, annually on what those thin client counts are. So taking a little bit of a deeper look into exactly what VDA is, I know Microsoft loves their acronyms. So Virtual Desktop Access, it really covers the thin clients or third-party devices. If you have rich clients, laptops, desktops, I would highly recommend evaluating software assurance. From a cost standpoint, it is going to be a little bit more cost effective. Plus, you're going to get a whole slew of benefits included in that. But for thin clients, you really don't have any other option. The Virtual Desktop Access subscription is exactly the only option. It's a retail price at around $100 a year a device. There are some additional programs or vehicles to procure under, which we might have time to get into at the end. And it does include software assurance. So it's essentially a way for you to license those thin clients on a subscription basis. So now that you know that there's two options, you probably want to consider which one makes most sense for you. Here's a recommendation of which license goes for which scenario. So you have, the first one is the virtual desktop infrastructure using PCs as access points. It's recommended to look at Windows 7 with SA, but of course you can always do the virtual desktop access subscription. Your thin clients, your contractors, or your employee-owned PCs, you're going to want to look at a VDA license. And then the rest of the scenarios, you have options. So they're all about giving you options. It's just what we do to kind of help you narrow down what those options are and make recommendations for your environment.
Well, thanks for clearing that up, Ashley. That can really be a complicated topic to tackle.
Mm-hmm.
If you don't mind, I'd like to quiz you a little bit on that to see just how well you know it.
Oh boy.
So we have some scenarios prepared here, and as we go through each scenario, could you give us a potential solution for that?
Sure.
Okay, we'll take a look at scenario number 1. We have a company with 100 corporate PCs. They're all covered by software assurance. And they need to access the virtual desktop environment. However, they only have 80 users, and only 50 of those VMs are in use at any one time.
Sure. So this is a pretty common situation. What a lot of end users will get, trapped in the weeds is how many users they have, how many virtual machines they're implementing. For Microsoft, it really doesn't matter. As long as those PCs are covered with software assurance, you have local and VDI rights. And so in this particular case, you would need to license those devices with SA. Doesn't matter the user count or the VMs. So for this end user, they would be already fully covered and no additional licensing would be required.
Great. Let's look at the next scenario then. In this scenario, we have a company with 100 PCs and also 100 thin clients. Thin clients are used for VDI only. Only 100 of the devices are used at any one given time, and access to only 100 of the VMs at any one time as well.
Okay. So another situation which is commonly confused with concurrent licensing. I know Citrix offers concurrent licensing model. There's a lot of third parties out there that do. Unfortunately, Microsoft does not. So in this case, even though only 100 devices are used at one time, we always ask the end user to go back and say, well, while that is efficient for you, Microsoft's terms require you to count every single PC or desktop. So in this case, they would need 100 thin clients covered with the virtual desktop access subscription license because they are thin clients. And as long as those 100 PCs are covered with software assurance, and they don't need anything in addition.
So if I understand that correctly, every device needs to be covered.
Correct.
Thanks. Let's take a look at the next scenario then. With this scenario, we have a company with 100 employees. They're all the primary users of 100 thin clients that are used to access the VDI environment. Occasionally, these employees need to access their same VDI environment from work. From home, I'm sorry.
So again, going back to what we had previously discussed in the last scenario, is every device needs to be covered, right? So here we're looking at 100 employees. We would ask as to how many thin clients they have. Here it says they have 100 thin clients. Immediately you think thin client, you think VDA. So you're going to need to make sure that every single one of those thin clients are covered with a virtual desktop access subscription. On top of that, which is I know it's fine print here, but it's actually a very important note, if any of these employees are accessing their remote desktop from home, we're not talking about bringing their thin client home and accessing it. That's separate. They go home, they log into their home PC, and they access their desktop from their home PC. If they are using Office, they need to make sure to have software assurance on that copy of Office to gain those home use rights. Otherwise, according to Microsoft, technically they would be short on the licensing.
Okay, Ashley, so for the occasional home user, VDI at least, it's okay if those users are licensed with the VDA subscription, but the Office is a little bit different. Right.
As long as that primary user is covered for a VDA license, they're fine on the OS component. It's the Office piece you have to be a little careful on.
Does software assurance on Office play a part of that?
Yes. Software assurance, you'd have to cover your Office application with SA, which is going to give you those home use rights. And therefore, then they can access Office anywhere they want.
Great. Let's take a look at the next scenario then. In this scenario, we have 300 thin clients that need access to the VDI environment. But because this particular company works in shifts, we only have 100 users at any one time that are accessing that environment. And there may be even fewer than 100 VMs in use. In this case, 50 VMs in use at any one time.
Sure. So a great example for this would be a manufacturer, or maybe even potentially a hospital where they have shift workers. They basically have users that come and go. They have less users than they have devices, or even potentially the opposite. So remember, you have to go back to the base rule of thumb, which is every device needs to be covered, whether it's a thin client or a rich client. So in this case, it's a thin client, so you immediately think VDA, and every thin client needs to be covered, so they would need to buy 300 VDA subscription licenses.
Okay, Ashley, and there's one other thing I'd like to add to this scenario as well from the technology perspective, and that is that Microsoft has recently introduced this new product called Windows 10 PC. Windows 10 PC is not something that you can purchase. It's actually a software assurance benefit if you have your desktop operating system on a volume license agreement. What Windows 10 PC does is it allows you to take older hardware that you may have been ready to refresh in a refresh cycle and utilize that as a thin client by installing Windows 10 PC on it. It's actually a Windows 7 kernel, but it's been scaled down so it'll run on a much smaller footprint. And it gives the users the ability to log on and access the virtual environment. And the great news about it is it can still be managed as a regular desktop. You can still use Configuration Manager or software update services to push out application packages and or software updates to it.
Right, which and to add to that point, virtual desktop access is subscription. So in this case, VDA includes SA, right? So essentially, they would be getting that SA benefit included in the subscription.
So it's a win-win.
Right. Okay.
Let's take a look at the next scenario. So in this scenario, we have 100 contractors. They're not employees of the company. They've been working for an extended period of time. And these contractors bring their own PCs into our environment, but they use those PCs to access our virtual environment.
Sure. So in this particular case, going back to who owns the PC, if you remember that chart at the beginning where we had recommendations on VDA versus a Windows 7 client, if they own their own device, I would highly recommend a virtual desktop access subscription. This being the VDA comes with 90-day permanent reassignment rights. So what you can do is, from January to June, you can assign those VDA subscription licenses to the 100 contractors. If they leave and new employees come on board and they're accessing their remote desktop, but they're bringing their own devices, you could then reassign those VDA subscription licenses to the next 100 batch. This gives you the flexibility also to, increase or lower the counts. So if you have, a seasonal business where you're bringing in 500 contractors during busy season, and then you're down to 20 in another, an off season, a subscription-based license allows you to change that.
Great job with the scenarios, Ashley. I think you passed the test.
Yay!
Well, let's see if we have any questions now.
Yes, it looks like there's a couple coming in through the chat module. And for those of you out there watching the webinar, please feel free to post in that module for any questions you have for the team here. We have one in from Peter. If desktop virtualization is something I decide to move forward with, what purchasing options do I have?
Oh, that is the million-dollar question. So we can go through the technology, we can go through the recommendations, but at the end of the day, we get a lot of questions as to what is this going to cost me and how should I buy it. That is something that SoftwareONE specializes in. So what we would recommend doing is looking at a couple different procurement vehicles depending on your desktop count, your user count, what range you fall into, whether you can qualify for an enterprise agreement or a select agreement. They all really depend on your procurement model and your decision-making model. So I would highly recommend maybe reaching out to one of us and we can follow up on an appointment and discuss what those options are. Microsoft provides a slew of programs available, however they can be very confusing. So I like to think that I'm pretty well equipped to help you in that area.
Great. Another question has come in from Raj. If I buy thin clients with Windows embedded, do they qualify for VDA?
Do you want to take that one, Jason?
Sure. The Windows Embedded OS is not an operating system that can be put on a volume license agreement. It's an operating system that is sold with the hardware, so it lives and dies with that piece of hardware. So if you purchase a thin client with the Windows Embedded operating system, that thin client would need to be covered by a VDA subscription in order to access a Microsoft desktop operating system in a virtual environment.
Because we think thin client, we think VDA right away, right?
Usually that's the case, right?
Okay.
Okay, so another one from Paris. So if I purchase VDA license, Windows 7 license is included with it? ...
If I purchase, say that again?
If I purchase a VDA license, Windows 7 license is included with it.
Yes, that is correct. So it's essentially licensing both covering you for thin client potentially and a local installation. So in the case that maybe you don't know yet what you're doing, or in the next 12 months you're looking at rolling out virtual desktop infrastructure but not yet today, purchasing VDA will protect you from having to rebuy it later. Whereas if you buy Windows 7 today, sure, you're covered from a rich client standpoint, but when you do move to a VDI environment, you're going to have to look at the subscription eventually. So to answer your question, it does include a full-out license.
Okay, great. And another question here from David. You mentioned that VDA is a benefit of software assurance. What exactly is software assurance?
It's a great question. So software assurance is a list of benefits that Microsoft includes when you purchase it. It's a annual subscription typically, or depending on the program you buy, and it can be a 3-year commit. Software assurance includes everything from roaming use rights for Office to cold backup for disaster recovery on your servers, to the home use program, which we were talking about with Office, which is becoming more and more important. It also includes training vouchers. So essentially, if you're looking at, you are moving to a VDI environment, and also maybe you're upgrading your Office application, and your end users don't quite know where to get training on, moving from 03 to 2010. It includes training vouchers, and it also includes online training, plus desktop deployment planning services. There is a laundry list of benefits that are included, and I would welcome probably a detailed conversation to follow up on that.
And Ashley, can I ask 2 follow-up questions to that as well?
Sure.
So first of all, with software assurance, if I have the desktop operating system on my volume license agreement, software assurance gives me the VDA license?
It gives you the rights for the virtual desktop infrastructure on the local and rich client. If you're looking at a thin client, it's a separate purchase.
And then the other follow-up question to that would be for the roaming users that need to use Office occasionally from home or from some other location, software assurance would cover them?
Yes, it would. Correct.
All right. Another question from Dave Lanfer. Can we use Citrix Zen Desktop VDI or Enterprise as long as I purchase MS VDA licenses?
Can you use that again?
Yeah, sure. Can we use Citrix Zen Desktop VDI or Enterprise as long as I purchase Microsoft VDA licenses?
Okay, so yes, you can use it. This is primarily for just the Windows operating system. You can use Citrix, you can use VMware, you can use essentially any third-party application, as long as at some point in time the end device accessing that operating system, as long as it's a Windows 7 or an XP or a Vista, that device point, that access point, needs to be covered with either software assurance or VDA if it's a thin client.
And I think that's really the key, Ashley, is that access point, right? That's what we're licensing here, not the virtual machine that's running in the VDI environment. It's the access point. It needs to be covered with the VDA.
Okay, another question from Joe. Is SA fixed priced or based on volume?
Software assurance is included with the license cost, and the license cost can be fixed or it can be based on volume. So it's kind of a yes to both. It really depends on the program that you buy under. For example, the enterprise agreement has a fixed price. So one of the benefits of the program is that when you enter into the contract, you can lock in a fixed price for the next 3 years. That includes SA and the cost of the license. But for example, maybe you're buying under a select agreement or an open business agreement. That pricing is not fixed per se as you move forward, but for example, if you were to buy 50 Windows 7 licenses with software assurance today, and you sign up for a select contract, which can be 3 years, that SA cost is either paid up front or annualized, and that particular order is fixed. Now moving forward, in 6 months you decide to buy a Windows 8 when it comes out with software assurance, you could be subject to whatever the price increase is at that time. So it's really contingent on the cost of the license, as software assurance is a portion of the cost of the license.
Wow, that sounds like it's very complicated and a lot to remember. I'm glad I have you as a counterpart.
Well, I'm kind of glad they make it complicated because it provides you job security, right?
Okay, well, it looks like, here's another question. Is there a Microsoft solution to manage all these various types of licenses, like a license server? This can be used to verify if we are license compliant.
There's not actually a license server to track the licenses, but what we do have at SoftwareONE is a service that we offer called Software Asset Management. And what that does is it allows us to take a look at your current environment, see what software and what operating systems you have deployed, and then we'll take a look at your licensing history to see what you're entitled to. And we'll perform an analysis on the results that we get back from our assessment and what you're entitled to, and present that to you and show you where the gaps are, whether you may be over or under licensed in certain areas.
And to that said, I believe SCCM has a small portion of managing your assets, but it's certainly not in depending on the size of company you have, it's not granular enough that it would be to fix your asset management.
That's right, Ashley. With Configuration Manager, you do have the ability to do a software inventory, and it does return some pretty decent results. But really, the challenge there is to try to take that information that you have and format it and make some sense out of it. And that's what we really offer as a software asset management as a service. We have a product catalog that we've already built, so we can normalize that data that you're receiving back and make it into a more usable and readable format.
Right.
Okay, another question from Paris. Hope I'm saying that name correctly. Is Windows VDA going to become mandatory if we are running Windows 7 VM on ESX?
Well, the VDA license is really only mandatory if it's a thin client access point. So again, it's going back to what device you're using to access your virtual desktop. If you're using ESX, it's a different licensing solution. There you would maybe be looking at more of the Windows Server side, the virtual instances, including in the type of Windows Server you purchase. That's a separate conversation. But for to answer your question, you have to look at the access point. If it's a thin client or an embedded client, you would, yes, it'd be mandatory to look at VDA. If it's a rich client, a laptop or desktop, you can purchase the Windows 7 with software assurance to cover you.
And that's true regardless of what hypervisor we're using for the platform.
Yep.
Okay, looks like that was our last question, unless another one feeds in here while we close. Thank you everyone for attending the first in the IPM Consider It Done series of virtual webinars and events. Our next one is same bat time, same day next week, Thursday at 2 o'clock. Which will be focused on empowering efficient IT, and special guest, the president of 1E, Nick Milne-Holm, will be presenting along again, of course, with IPM. A couple of things to note again. If you do think of questions later, or you want to dive into these topics a little more deeply, please feel free to post some dates and times to connect with SoftwareONE and IPM to your right. Question we always get is, will this webinar be available after close? And the answer is yes. Within a couple of days, probably within a day, just go back to ipmconsideritdone.com and head to the resources section, where under SoftwareONE you'll see a full recording of this webinar. And also we will be sending out a link to that as a reminder. Thank you to SoftwareONE for the presentation today.
Thank you.
Thanks, Shannon, IPM. And we'll see everybody next Thursday. Have a great weekend.